Hi, I'm Michael Fix, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about guitar setups, why it's important, what difference does it make, and what you should look for when you pick up a guitar, especially if you're a beginner and the guitar feels a little difficult to play. Sometimes the guitar might be a great quality, but it feels hard to play. It hurts your fingers. If you don't have that comfort and that enjoyment, you're not likely to play the guitar. So in the course of this video, I'll be talking to Andrew Armstrong, who is a luthier. This conversation was inspired by something that happened to me quite recently. I had a domestic flight, got off the plane in Paris, and discovered that the back of my guitar had been severely cracked in two places. Now, fortunately, in my situation, I had a couple of days before my first concert, so I happened to be passing through an area where I knew a luthier, a German guy called Dirk Jungblut, and I contacted him, and he realized it was an emergency operation that was required, and he managed to get the guitar to me within 2 days, and it's been fantastic ever since. And it served to remind me about how important a good luthier is. As I'd been talking to people about guitar setups, about luthiers, I realized a lot of people don't actually know what a luthier actually does. Enjoy the conversation with Andrew. I'm with Andrew Armstrong from Armstrong Luthiery and Brisbane Guitar Making School. Great to see you, Andrew.
Thanks, Michael. Nice to see you.
Well, I've come here for two reasons today. One is to pick up my guitar, which you've been doing some work on, and we'll have a look at that in a short while. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to ask you, you're a luthier. What is a luthier exactly?
It's a great question because I have people ask me that all the time. It's not a well-known word, so it derives from lute, and makers of lutes, and therefore luthiers, and it's evolved into luthier. The Americans, I think, in the last few decades have popularised it as a term that refers to really the maker of any stringed instrument, including the violin family instruments and others. And these days it's become sort of a fairly popular name for people who work on guitars in particular, but really any stringed instrument.
What came first for you? Were you repairing guitars and that led on to making guitars, or the other way around?
No, it really came the other way around. I started making guitars because I wanted an electric guitar at the time, and I was thinking about buying one, and with some woodworking skills behind me, I thought I might have a crack at making one. So I made a number of electric guitars, and that's what got me into the whole guitar thing. Later on, as a way to help fund my hobby, my passion, my addiction, I was looking for ways to make a bit of money, but also to learn more about guitars. And so there's a lot more repair work available to be done. And again, I was doing it as a part-time hobby, and that led me into repair work. And I was doing that a lot more than making guitars for a while. And then about 5 years ago, I just realised this is what I wanted to do a lot more of. And so I started the Brisbane Guitar Making School, and I got a lot more involved in the making of guitars. Probably one of the most common things is just to do what we call a setup. Take a guitar and make sure that it's set up to be as playable as possible, and I can explain a little bit more about that. One of the other repairs that we've had a lot of in the last 6 to 12 months is lifting bridges. Particularly here in Brisbane with the heat, I think people have left guitars in the heat and the bridges start to become unstuck. But we get all sorts of repairs in, from broken headstocks, cracked tops, people that have dropped or stood on their guitars and cracked them, fret work, just a whole range. Some people just want to change out the pickups in their electric guitar, so then they want to take out whatever's in there and put something else in.
I wanted to go a little deeper into a setup and what that means exactly. Because I know a lot of people will buy a brand new guitar and spend a lot of money on it and then be disappointed that they find it difficult to play. And why is that, and what can you do about it?
Well, this guitar came in just a couple of days ago, and it's an example of what you're talking about, Michael. It's a relatively new Maton. It's a nice guitar. It's been beautifully made. It's no reason why you wouldn't take it out of the shop and hope to just play it. And it does play, but the owner is astute enough to realise that it could be improved. So what we do when we talk about doing a setup it's really about making sure that the guitar is as playable as possible. We want to make sure that the height of the strings above the fretboard, we refer to that as the action, the distance between the strings and the frets, both at the top end of the fretboard and at the, well, I guess that would be the top end of the fretboard and the bottom end of the fretboard. So the height over the first fret normally, the height over the 12th fret. A lot of people don't realise that the nuts are normally cut so the strings are sitting higher than they need to be. So we like to start by adjusting the action here. We look to get the action over the 12th fret where it needs to be for best playability. That normally means moving the bridge around. Another aspect of setup is making sure that the profile of the neck, in terms of how flat it is or whether it's got any curvature in it, we refer to that as relief. It needs a small amount of relief, meaning a small amount of curvature, but the way we adjust that with modern guitars is with a thing that's buried in the neck called a truss rod. Truss rods shouldn't be messed with unless you really know what you're doing. A lot of people are under the mistaken idea that the truss rod is used to adjust action. It does that as a secondary thing, but that's not what it's there for.
When you think about it, it's very logical, isn't it? If the slots here are too high in the nut, it's going to be really difficult to play bar chords in the first, second, third position.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, particularly people that are starting their journey as guitar players, where do you learn? You learn to play in the first 5 frets, and you can spend an awful lot of early time there. Well, if we don't get the action right here, this is where those really painful fingertips come from. It's working hard to, particularly on a steel string guitar. So we can just about always improve the feel and playability by getting the nut adjusted.
Yeah. Once a guitar leaves a factory, it could be nicely set up in the factory, but once you get to different weather conditions, high humidity, low humidity, hot and cold, of course, it's timber, it's moving, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think people don't realise how much it can move. And once again, they can move around during the year with the change in seasons, and it's an idea that you want to keep an eye on that. But if it's been moved from where it was made into a totally different environmental situation, that can lead to those changes, and they can be worked out. The guitar can be readjusted to take account of that.
I guess as part of your job, it's customising instruments, making them a bit more personal to the player.
Absolutely, and I'll have players who will have, depending on the size of their hands and the strength of their fingers, again, that has to do with setup. For a lot, it's about what can we do to change the sound. I don't get that question so much with acoustic guitars. I do get it a little bit more with electric guitars, and that comes down to changes that can be made to the electronics and things like that.
Yeah, this is actually one of the reasons why I came to see you today, to pick up my guitar. It's a 1974 Martin D35S in very nice condition. I might do a separate video on this guitar, but I had some problems with it. One of them was that the top E string had a kind of a twang to it on every fret.
Well, I spent a bit of time really examining this instrument. One of the things I can do is check individual frets to see whether there are any high points, and one of the concerns was that maybe there was a fret in the upper part of the fretboard that was high. It turned out, in fact, that fret number 18 and fret number 19 were both high relative to their friends, but there were also a number of high points in different places all the way back to about, the 7th or 8th fret. So the first thing I did was identify where all those high points are and file the frets down until we had a level surface. The frets end up with a flat top, so then the next thing is to use a special file to recrown them, make them round, take out all the file marks and repolish them. So I repolished the whole fretboard. Put the strings back on it and played it, and it was still buzzing. It was better, but it was still buzzing. And the only way then that I had at my disposal at that point was to slightly raise the action. The action on this guitar was relatively low. It wasn't super low. So I ended up making a whole new saddle because I just wanted to lift this end, not so much this end, just a small amount. And the saddle that was already in there was so thin, so low, that there really wasn't any material to work with. So there's a new bone saddle. And the other thing I did to address that question of intonation that you mentioned is I've shaped the top of the saddle so that the strings are breaking right on the back edge, which just pushes that break point back.
Yep.
You know, maybe a millimetre. I'm not even sure it's that amount. To the extent that helped, and it's playing quite nicely.
Yeah, given an old guitar a new lease of life. Well, it's been really informative. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No problem.
And I'm sure the people watching this will have gained some pretty useful information. So thank you, Andrew.
No problem. Thanks, Michael. Glad I could help.
I do my own setups when I'm traveling. I've learned some basic skills. On my Maton guitars, I have the action set pretty low because I'm doing solo concerts. It's really so my hands don't get sore over a 2-hour performance. When I'm traveling from country to country, specifically from Australia, where maybe it's the middle of winter or summer, whatever the case may be, and then I go to the other side of the planet where it's the opposite season. The guitar, being a piece of timber, of course, it's going to move. So it was important for me to learn how to do a basic truss rod adjustment. But anything further than that, if it's the saddle or the nut or reef frets, that's when I visit my luthier.